Hello and welcome to the August subscription tasting video. I'm back here in Oslo after my long vacation up north in Norway, and I'm back to work, and it's really exciting because we are getting a lot of new coffees in storage. And today we're going to taste 3 of them that we have all been waiting for the whole summer. The Kenyan coffees have finally arrived. Yes. So we're going to send out 3 Kenyan coffees to you. And these are really good, I think, and perfect for a late summer iced coffee. You can check out how we brew our iced coffee in our YouTube channel or in our brewing guides on our website. Or you can just drink them warm. They're also delicious for that. So they don't have to be cold, but Kenyan coffees in general are really good for using for iced coffees because the fruitiness and intensity of acidity and sweetness, it tastes really good when it's cooling down. But don't be afraid to add a little bit of sweetener to it because it just enhances the fruitiness even more when the coffee is cold. Okay, when the coffees are warm, of course, you can drink them without any additives and preferably without milk because milk in Kenyan coffees don't match up that well because of the acidity in the coffee. You can see that the milk sometimes coagulates. Okay, so these coffees were a little bit delayed. Normally we will get Kenyan coffees in June. But because of some delay in the shipment, the container went from Kenya to Saudi Arabia, and then it was stuck in the port there for 6 weeks almost. And then it got on another boat, and it went to Europe and then to Oslo. So it's quite a long time from when we bought the coffee until the coffee arrives. A normal shipping time outside of COVID and all the chaos that's going on in the shipping world at the moment. Like last year, the shipping took, I think, 5 weeks in total. This year it took, I think, almost 10 weeks. So it was quite long. And I was afraid that the coffees might have deteriorated. That means the green coffee can also go stale because it's full of fats and acids inside that can oxidize, and the coffee can taste woody after a while. And this happens with all coffees, but normally the coffees we buy, it's dried very carefully and we vacuum pack the coffee before shipping. So normally the coffees we buy, they stay and they taste fresh for a long time, and sometimes more than a year. But we try to kind of get rid of the coffee before it's a year. It's not always possible because we only buy from certain producers year after year. And then we have kind of developed new drying techniques and packaging techniques in order to make sure the coffee tastes fresh. So I was a little worried with this container because it's been in Saudi Arabia for 6 weeks and it's very hot there in the port. And we know that heat and moisture is not very good for the shelf life of the green coffee. But of course, these were vacuum packed, so moisture is not an issue, but the heat can still be an issue. So when these coffees arrived, I made my team taste them first, and they thought they tasted good. Then I came home from vacation, and I also tasted them, and I felt that they tasted really good, actually. So I'm really happy about that, and hopefully they will keep well for a long time. What I'm looking for in these Kenyan coffees is obviously a fruity flavor. You don't want the kind of woody flavors you get from old coffees. So fruity flavors is what Kenyan coffees are all about. And they do have very high acidity, but people tend to be a little bit afraid of acidity when we mention the word acidity. But acidity is actually very good in coffee. It's also very good in wine, in juice, in fruit. You know, everything that you kind of think is nice and fresh is because of its acidity. Now, if the coffee didn't have a lot of kind of flavor to back up the acidity or sweetness to back up the acidity, then you will perceive the coffee as being very sour. And you can get very sour coffee from under-extracting, for instance. That means you're grinding too coarsely, for instance, or brewing with very cold water. Or you can get sourness from the green coffee not being well roasted, and so on. So a lightly roasted Kenyan, expect very high acidity, but it's backed up with a lot of fruit flavor and also sweetness. And if you taste these coffees when they're really hot, they're not gonna kind of shine. But if you let them cool down a little bit so that they're closer to your body temperature, I prefer, I think, between 40 and 60 degrees to drink it in that kind of window. Then you'll get a lot more sweetness and fruit flavor from these coffees. And I also enjoy drinking these when they are cool down, actually. I can still enjoy drinking them, but I prefer them close to body temperature. That's when you really get the fruity flavors and the freshness of these coffees. So Kenyan coffees are famous for its fruitiness, its high acidity, and that's all or mainly because of the variety that they grow in Kenya. And traditionally they've been growing SL28 and SL34, which is kind of a Scott Laboratories number 34 and number 28. These are plants that were selected in a kind of research garden. They're not kind of chemically or biologically crossed by humans. It's actually selections made. So it's nothing to do with GMO or anything. It's just there was a research lab called Scott Laboratories that kind of gathered seeds and planted, and they selected the plants based on the attributes that they got. Maybe they did some crossbreeding, I'm not sure, but at least the SL28 is famous for high yields, very high quality, and also partly drought resistance. And 34 as well, good yields and very high quality. So when you plant these trees in countries like Colombia, Honduras, you can expect the coffees to also taste a little bit more fruity than what's normal. So compared to the Catuai, for instance, in the Caballeros farms that we have sent out last month, we also sent out the SL28 there, and there was a distinct difference in the fruitiness in the coffee. Of course, when it's grown in Kenya, the climate also has an impact on the flavor, and also the soils. And a lot of times these trees are really, really old. That means they have a very, very good root system. And these roots tend to grow quite deep, actually. So you can actually visit farms where you see the trunks are huge, but they will stump the trees maybe every 5 to 10 years in order to get new kind of stems to grow where they can produce more coffee. So, you know, after 5 to 10 years, you will renew the farm, they can call it, and then they cut down the trees. You have new stems growing up. And in Kenya, you normally have quite big space between the trees, so they might have 4 to 5 stems growing up from one trunk. And on these stems, you have branches where all the coffee cherries are growing. So they kind of keep the same tree for a very, very long time. And I've visited farms where they have trees that was planted in 1940s, and the trunks are huge, and it's quite impressive to see. So these are the traditional varieties in Kenya, and a big part of why the Kenyan coffees taste so fruity, because the SL28 and 34 do have these kind of fruity flavors. In later years, some of the farmers that are belonging to cooperatives, they have planted new hybrids called Ruiru 11 and Batian. And they are kind of developed in Kenya by the Kenyan Agricultural Research Foundation, or Coffee Research Foundation, I think it's called now. And they have used the plant material that they already had, like the SL trees, and crossbred them with the Hybrido de Timor and other varieties to make them more resistant against coffee berry disease and coffee leaf rust. So some buyers are quite skeptic to these new varieties because they feel the quality isn't there. And I have actually tasted them separately quite a few times now. And yes, there is a difference between the quality of the Ruiru 11 and SL28. But what we don't know when we taste those kind of samples is how was the trees treated and where were they grown. So you might take a Ruiru 11 from a lower altitude and compare it to an SL28 from a higher altitude. So you're not necessarily only comparing the difference in variety. It might also be the altitude that you're comparing. So I would say personally that I can't really conclude whether Batian is better than a SL28 or the opposite, because I haven't really tasted them from the same plots. And even if I did, it would only be one sample and not, you know, many samples over time. So I would say it's not concluded yet whether these hybrids are better or worse, but I think the general perception is that people prefer the older varieties like the SLs. Also, the farmers tend to talk very positively about the SLs because they have high yields and so on. But the problem is they do have a lot of problems with pests and disease, which means they need to spray a lot of agrochemicals in order to prevent these diseases to attack the trees so that they lose their crop. So this is a problem, and it can also be prevented by good agricultural practices. But you know, this is a huge problem in Kenya, and partly why these hybrids are gaining in popularity. Okay, so let's talk about and taste the coffees that we're going to send out to all the subscribers this month. Starting with number 1. This is a coffee from a washing station. And when I say washing station, This is a wet mill where they gather coffee cherries from members of the cooperative. They will process and dry the coffee there. So a cooperative might have several different washing stations depending on the area. So for instance, the Tekangu cooperative, they have 4 different washing stations. Karogoto is one, Tegu is one, Ngunguru is one, and the 4th one I can't remember the name. But they are located in different areas in a small region. And that means members who live nearby a wet mill, they can more easily go and deliver their cherries. And what you see when you go to one of these wet mills, or factories they call it, is that the members will come, either they will walk or maybe with bicycle, with a bag of cherries. They come to the wet mill and they weigh the cherries. They get a receipt on how much they delivered. Then they have to sort cherries, and then they deliver ripe cherries in one hopper and not so nice cherries into another hopper. And then once in the end of the day, when all the farmers delivered that they have delivered their cherries, the factory manager will start to process the coffee, which means depulping, fermenting, washing and drying. And this can take 2 to 3 days to kind of process the whole batch, and then it will dry for 10 to 14 days. So the first wet mill or coffee from a wet mill that we're gonna send out is from Karogoto. And Karogoto is a wet mill we've been buying from for many, many years. And we also sponsored some drying tables for this factory because we want them to be able to produce very nice coffees for us. And this is partly also why the coffees are so clean, because they have a lot of drying capacity. So even when the harvest is very concentrated and a lot of the farmers deliver coffee at the same time, they are able to dry the coffee efficiently without any problems. The Karogoto coffee for me is normally quite recognizable on the table. And I think this year as well, it has kind of this very characteristic, very clean flavors. It's a little bit more slim. It's not such a meaty fruitiness. It's more like a slim, elegant, structured fruitiness. And for me, when it's hot, you get a lot of this kind of rose hips flavor, which, you know, in many countries you can associate with the Flor de Jamaica or hibiscus flower. When you make tea on that, it's kind of a very nice fruitiness with a quite high acidity. I can get a little bit of rhubarb, maybe some raspberries sometimes. And overall, it has this kind of black curranty flavor with a rosehip, hibiscus. Yeah, and it's quite distinct. Maybe you can find some apple-like acidity as well. But it's really, really distinct, quite slim, very fruity, nice high acidity, and sort of very refreshing to drink for me. So the farmers who deliver to the Karogoto washing station, they live close to it. And the altitudes are around 1,500 to 1,700 meters, which means it's fairly high altitude. But some of them have already planted some hybrids, but most of them are still growing SL28 and SL34. But because, you get a slightly lower altitude, down to 1,500 maybe, you will see some farmers who are growing Ruiru 11 and also now Batian. So I don't feel like the quality has deteriorated because of this over the years. I feel that the quality from Karogoto is very, very consistent. I think it's also much due to they have agronomists that work for the cooperative who assist the farmers and train the farmers. They have the same factory manager who's been there for many years, Mr. Ephraim, who is a very, very nice guy, and he kind of knows the details into how to produce a good quality, clean Kenyan coffee. So the first coffee, it's a double A, which means it's the biggest beans from a batch of coffee, and it's from the Karogoto factory. Now the second coffee is from a washing station that is not so far away. Maybe it's 10 to 20 minutes to drive, and it's called Gachatha. And this is quite a different profile, although it's quite near Karogoto. Yeah, the coffee for me is much more kind of meaty. It's a more kind of a fleshy, ripe berry fruit, maybe like cherries, blackcurrant, blackberries. It's a really, really nice coffee and very intense. Yeah, and a big kind of rich mouthfeel with a lot of kind of dark purple berry fruit flavors. I bought this coffee. I was taking a little bit of risk because when I measured the moisture on the green coffee sample, it measured quite high. But when I got the pre-ship sample, we could get a sample that was much lower in moisture. And the reason for this might be that they have stored the sample in a moist place, or the coffee was drying a little bit more before we actually got the pre-shipment sample. So the risk when you have high moisture in a sample is that the coffee can go woody faster. But this measured quite low when it arrived, so I was happy about that. And this is also a pea berry, so it's not a lot of bags. So it's mainly for our subscribers. And pea berry means when a coffee bean inside a cherry, there's only one coffee bean instead of two. They get kind of a round shape. And yeah, people call them pea berry. In some countries it's considered a defect, but in Kenya it's sold separately from the double A's and the smaller beans, ABs. And the pea berry for me can be quite intense. I'm not sure if it's because it's only one bean inside the cherry. I think it might also be because it's a little bit easier to roast evenly, because it's a more rounded shaped bean. Wow, so really rich, meaty, sweet, very, very fruity coffee from Gachatha. In both of these first coffees are from Nyeri in Kenya. And then the last coffee is from a slightly different area. It's a little bit closer to Nairobi. You know, on any given day, it'll take maybe an hour to drive, maybe two, depending on traffic. But it's high in the mountains in Kiambu, which is quite close to a place called Ruiru in Kenya. And this is situated on a slightly higher altitude than the first ones. These are more or less the same, but the last coffee is a little bit higher altitude, around 1800 meters. And it's called Karinga, the washing station. All of these are washing stations belonging to different cooperatives. So all of these are coffees where farmers deliver cherries and the cherries get processed together. So it's kind of a bulked coffee, so to say. And it's a mix of coffee from different farmers in all of them. But in the last coffee, Karinga, most of these farmers are still only growing SL28 and some SL34. And there's very few of them who have planted the hybrids because the higher altitude, they have less problems with pests and disease there. And I'm not sure if that's the reason, but this coffee is, for me, it's quite floral and quite different from these two. When you cup it, it has a really kind of oily texture as well, in a pleasant way, with a lot of florality and quite a distinct acidity as well, but also this kind of blackberry flavors and blackcurrant. So like think purple berries that are quite floral as well. That's the flavors that I get from the Karinga coffee. So to sum up, the first coffee, so all subscribers who subscribe to one bag or more will get Karogoto coffee. It's a double A, so that means the bigger beans. The second bag we're sending out to all the people who subscribe to 2 bags or more will get a bag of Gachatha. It's a pea berry, so the small rounded beans. And the third coffee is from a washing station called Karinga, also double A, so bigger beans. I'm not sure why I'm talking about the size of the beans, because it doesn't really matter. We normally don't market it because for me it's all about the flavor in the cup and not the size of the beans. So for instance, when we sell other coffees from other countries, we don't really talk about the bean size. But in some weird way, this has been the case in Kenya because they're so good at processing the coffees and separating the different sizes and all of these things. So I guess it's kind of relevant, but for me, the flavor is a little bit more relevant. Cool. I hope you enjoyed this little lesson in coffee. Next month, we have some really exciting coffees as well. And if you really like high acidity and these kind of fruity and floral coffees, maybe then you should subscribe to our coffees next month because, well, a keyword might be Ethiopia. They have just arrived this week, so we'll start testing them and hopefully we'll be able to send them out for our next subscription. I hope you enjoy these coffees. If you want to subscribe to our coffees, then check out our website. I guess there's a link below. And also remember to check out our brewing guides where you can learn how to brew these coffees. These are all quite lightly roasted, so don't be afraid of using very hot water. We use boiling water normally, and even when we do pour over, as hot as possible, and make sure the water is soft, not too many or high in mineral content. That really makes these coffees shine, and you get the acidity and the fruitiness much more pronounced when you do it like that. Cool, thanks for watching, and until next time, have a good rest of the summer. Ciao, ciao.